We know that doing anything is work. So, when we work on anything, we put some effort into it to get some output. That effort may be mental or physical or may be the combination of both. So, that effort is called labor, and the persons who puts effort are called laborers. Now, we may feel that each and every person in this world, whoever he or she is, or how rich or poor is that person, is a laborer. Either in his own work, it may be business, or for any kind of job or social services. It's true that not all the effort earns monetary benefit, and there lies the scope of labor economics, right? Welcome to my channel Arnab Ghosh Psychonomy once again. There are four factors of production which are land, labor, capital and organization. So being an important factor of production process, it plays a very crucial role. Labor economics seeks to understand the functioning and dynamics of the market for wage labor. Labor is a commodity that is supplied by laborers in exchange for a wage paid by demanding firms. Because these laborers exist as parts of a social, institutional, or political system, labor economics is often regarded as a sociology or political science. Labor markets or job markets function through the interaction of workers and employers. Labor economics looks at the suppliers of labor services, workers, and the demanders of labor services, the employers, and attempts to understand the resulting pattern of wages, employment, and income. These patterns exist because each individual in the market is presumed to make rational choices based on information that they know regarding wage, desire to provide labor, and desire for the leisure. Labor markets are normally geographically bounded, but the rise of the internet has brought about a planetary labor market in some sectors, especially information technology. Labor is a measure of work done by human beings. It is conventionally contrasted with other factors of production such as land and capital. Some theories focus on human capital or entrepreneurship, which refers to the skill that workers possess and not necessarily the actual work that they produce. Labor is unique to study because it is a special type of good that cannot be separated from owner. That is, the work cannot be separated from a person who does it. A labor market is also different from the other markets in that workers are the suppliers and firms are the demanders. Now, macro and micro analysis of labor markets. There are two sides of labor economics. Labor economics can generally be seen as the application of microeconomic or macroeconomic techniques to the labor market. Microeconomic techniques study the role of individuals and individual firms in the labor market. Macroeconomic techniques look at the interrelations between the labor market, the goods market, the money market, and the foreign trade market. It looks at how these interactions influence macro variables such as employment level, participation rates, aggregate income, and gross domestic product, which is GDP. Now, the macroeconomics and whereabouts of the labor markets. The labor markets in macroeconomic theory shows that supply of labor exceeds demand. which has been proven by salary growth that lags productivity growth. When labor supply exceeds demand, salary faces downward pressure due to an employer's ability to pick from a labor pool that exceeds the job pool. However, if the demand for labor is larger than the supply, salary increases as employee have more bargaining power while employer have to compete the scarce labor. The labor force is defined as the number of people of working age who are either employed or actively looking for work, means he or she is unemployed. The labor force participation rate, which is known as the term LFPR, is the number of people in the labor force divided by the size of the adult civilian non-institutional population or by the population of working age that is not institutionalized. That means LFPR is equal to LF divided by total population. Now, the non-labor force includes those who are not looking for work, those who are institutionalized, such as in prisons or psychiatric wards, stay at home spouses, children not of working age, and those serving in the military. The unemployment level is defined as the labor force minus the number of people currently employed. The unemployment rate is defined as the level of unemployment divided by labor force. The employment rate is defined as the number of people currently employed divided by the adult population or by the population of working age only. In these statistics, self-employed people are counted as employed. The skills required in a labor force can vary from individual to individual as well as from farm to farm also. Some farms have specific skills they are interested in, limiting the labor force to certain criteria. A farm requiring specific skills will help determine the size of the market. Variables like employment level, unemployment level, labor force, and unfilled vacancies are called stock variables because they measure a quantity at a point in time. They can be contrasted with flow variables which measure a quantity over a duration of time. Changes in the labor force are due to flow variables such as natural population growth, net immigration, new entrants, and retirements. Changes in unemployment depends on inflows, non-employed people starting to look for jobs, and employed people who lost their jobs that are looking for new ones, and the outflows, the people who find new employment and people who stop looking for employment. Now, when looking at the overall macroeconomy, several types of unemployment have been identified, which can be separated into two categories of natural and unnatural unemployment. Natural unemployment. First one, frictional unemployment. This reflects the fact that it takes time for people to find and settle into new jobs that they feel are appropriate for them and their skill set. Technological advancement often reduces frictional unemployment. For example, internet search engines have reduced the cost and time associated with locating employment or personal selection. Second one is structural unemployment. The number of jobs available in an industry are not sufficient enough to provide jobs to all persons. who are interested in working or qualified to work in that industry. This can be due to changes in industry prevalent in a country or because wages for the industry are too high, causing people to want to supply their labor to that industry. Third one is natural rate of unemployment, which is also called full unemployment. This is a summation of frictional, structural that excludes cyclical contributions of unemployment, which is recession, and seasonal unemployment. It is the lowest rate of unemployment that a stable economy can expect to achieve, given that some frictional and structural unemployment is inevitable. Economists do not agree on the level of natural rate, with estimates ranging from 1% to 5%, or on its meaning. Some associate it with non-accelerating inflation. The estimated rate varies between countries and across time. Unnatural unemployment. Demand deficient unemployment, which is also called cyclical unemployment. In Keynesian economics, any level of unemployment beyond the natural rate is probably due to insufficient goods demand in overall economy. During a recession, aggregate expenditure is deficient, causing the underutilization of inputs. Aggregate expenditure can be increased according to Keynes by increasing consumption, increasing investment, increasing government spending, or increasing the net of exports minus imports. Seasonal unemployment. Unemployment due to seasonal fluctuations of demand for workers across the industries, such as in the retail industry after holidays that involve a lot of shopping, are over. Neoclassical microeconomics of labor markets. Neoclassical economists in the view of labor market as similar to other markets in that the forces of supply and demand jointly determine the price and quantity. However, the labor market differs from other markets like the markets for goods or the financial market in several ways. In particular, labor market may act as non-clearing market, while according to neoclassical theory, most markets quickly attain a point of equilibrium without excess supply or demand. This may not be true of the labor market. It may have a persistent level of unemployment. Contrasting the labor market to the other markets also reveals persistent compensating differentials among similar workers. Models that assume perfect competition in labor market as discussed below conclude that workers earn their marginal product of the labor. Now, neoclassical microeconomic model of supply. Households are suppliers of the labor, we know that. In microeconomic theory, people are assumed to be rational and seeking to maximize their utility function. In the labor market model, their utility function expresses trade-offs in preference between leisure time and income from time used for the labor. However, they are constrained by the hours available to them. Let W denote the hourly wage, K denote the total hours available for labor and leisure, L denote the chosen number of working hours, TT denote income from non-labor sources, and A denote leisure hours chosen. The individual's problem is to maximize the utility, which is U, which depends on total income available for spending on consumption and also depends on the time spent in leisure, subject to a time constraint, which respect to the choices of labor time and the leisure time. This is shown in the graph in the book of labor economics, which illustrates the trade-off between allocating time to leisure activities and allocating it to the income generating activities. The linear constraint indicates that every additional hour of leisure undertaking requires the loss of an hour of labor and thus of the fixed amount of goods that labor's income could purchase. Individuals must choose how much time to allocate to leisure activities and how much to the working in a 24 hours time. This allocation decision is informed by indifference curve, which is labeled IC. The curve indicates the combinations of leisure and work that will give the individual a specific level of utility. The point where the highest indifference curve is just tangent to the constraint line point A illustrates the optimum for this supplier of labor services. If consumption is measured by the value of the income obtained, then it can be used to show a variety of interesting effects. This is because of the absolute value of the slope of the budget constraint is the wage rate. The point of optimization point A reflects the equivalency between the wage rate and the marginal rate of substitution of leisure for income. Because the marginal rate of substitution of labor for income is also the ratio of the marginal utility of leisure to the marginal utility of income, one can conclude this as where y is the total income and the right side of the wage rate. If the wage rate increases, this individual's constraint line pivots up from xy to xy2. He or she can now purchase more goods and services. His or her utility will increase from point A on IC to point B on IC2. To understand what effect this might have on the decision of how many hours to work, one must look at the income effect and substitution effect. The wage increases shown in the previous scenario can be decomposed in two separate effects. The pure income effect is shown as the movement from point A to point C in the next scenario. Now the consumption increases from Y to YC, and since the scenario assumes that leisure is a normal good, leisure time increases from x to x1. The employment time decreases by same amount as the leisure increases because there is a time constraint of 24 hours in a day. Now we will discuss neoclassical microeconomic model of the demand. We know a firm's labor demand is based on its marginal physical product of labor, MPP. This is defined as the additional output or physical product that results from an increase of one unit of labor or from an infinite increase of labor. Labor demand is a derived demand, that is, hiring labor is not desired for its own sake, but rather because it aids in producing output which contributes to an employer's revenue and hence profits. The demand for an additional amount of labor depends on the marginal revenue product, MRP, and the marginal cost, MC, of the worker. With the perfectly competitive goods market, the MRP is calculated by multiplying the price of the end product or service by marginal physical product of the worker. If MRP is greater than the marginal farm's cost, then the farm will employ the worker, since doing so will increase the profit. The firm only employs, however, up the point where MRP is equal to MC and not beyond in neoclassical economic theory. The MRP of the worker is affected by other inputs to the production with which the worker can work, that is machinery, often aggregated under the term capital. It is typical in economics model for greater availability of capital for a firm to increase the MRP of the worker. All else equal, education and training are counted as human capital. Since the amount of physical capital affects MRP, and since the financial capital flows can affect the amount of physical capital available, MRP and thus wages can be affected by financial capital flows within and between the countries and the degree of capital mobility within and between the countries. So it's an international scenario in the labor market. According to neoclassical theory, over the relevant range of outputs, the marginal physical product of labor is declining, which is due to the law of diminishing returns. That is, as more and more units of labor are employed, their additional output begins to decline. Additionally, although the MRP is a good way of expressing an employer's demand, other factors such as social group formation can the demand as well as the labor supply. This constantly restructures exactly what a labor market is and leads way to cause problems for the theories of inflation. The marginal revenue product of labor can be used as the demand for labor supply curve for the firm in short run. In competitive markets, a firm faces a perfectly elastic supply of labor which corresponds with the wage rate and marginal resources cost of labor. In imperfect market, the diagram would have to be adjusted because MFC would then be equal to wage rate divided by marginal costs. Because optimum resource allocation requires that marginal factor costs equal marginal revenue product, this firm would demand L units of labor as shown in the diagram. The demand for labor of this firm can be summed with demand for supply and labor of all other firms in the economy to obtain the aggregate demand of labor. Likewise, the supply curves of all the individual workers mentioned above can be summed to obtain the aggregate supply of labor. These supply and demand curves can be analyzed in the same way as any other industry demand and supply curves to determine equilibrium wage and employment levels. Wage differences exists particularly in mixed and fully or partly flexible labor markets. For example, the wages of a doctor and a port cleaner, both employed by NHS, differ greatly. There are various factors concerning this phenomena. This includes the MRP of the worker. A doctor's MRP is far greater than that of the cleaner. In addition, the barriers to becoming a doctor are far greater than that of becoming a cleaner. To become a doctor takes a lot of education and training, which is costly, and only those who excel in academics can succeed in becoming doctors. The cleaner, however, requires relatively less training. The supply of doctors is therefore significantly less elastic than that of the cleaners. Demand is also inelastic as there is a high demand for doctors and medical care is necessity. So NHS will pay a higher wage rate to attract the profession. What is monopsony? Some labor markets have single employer and thus do not satisfy the perfect competition assumption of neoclassical model. The model of monopsonistic labor market gives a lower quantity of employment and a lower equilibrium wage rate than does the competitive model. Now some information for you students. In many real life situations, the assumption of perfect information is unrealistic. An employer does not necessarily know how hard workers are working or how productive they are. This provides an incentive for workers to shirk from providing their full effort, called a moral hazard. Since it is difficult for the employer to identify the hard work and shirking employees, there is no incentive to work hard and productivity falls overall, leading to the hiring of more workers and a lower unemployment rate. One solution that is used to avoid a moral hazard is stock options that grant employees the chance to benefit directly from a firm's profit. However, this solution has attracted criticism as executives with large stock option packages have been suspected of acting to overinflate share values to the detriment of the long run welfare of the firm. Another solution foreshadowed by the rise of temporary workers in Japan and the firing of many of these workers in response to the financial crisis of 2008 is more flexible job contracts and terms that encourage employees to work less than full time by partially compensating for loss of hours, relying on workers to adapt their working time in response to job requirements and economic conditions instead of the employer trying to determine how much work is needed to complete a given task and overestimating. Another aspect of uncertainty result from the firm's imperfect knowledge about worker ability. If a firm is unsure about workers' ability, it pays a wage assuming that the worker's ability is the average of the similar workers. This wage under compensates high ability workers, which may drive them away from the labor market as well as the same time attracting low ability workers. Such a phenomena is called adverse selection, can sometimes lead to a market collapse. One way to combat adverse selection is that firms will try to use signaling pioneered by Michael Spence, whereby employers could use various characteristics of applicants differentiate between high ability or low ability workers. One common signal used is education, whereby employers assume that high ability workers will have high levels of education. Employers can then compensate high ability workers with higher wages. However, signaling does not always work, and it may appear to an external observer that education has raised the marginal product of labor without this necessarily being true. At micro level, one sub-discipline eliciting increased attention in the recent decades is analysis of internal labor markets, that is within firms, studied in personal economics from the perspective of personal management or human resource management. By contrast, external labor markets imply that workers move somewhat fluidly between the firms and wages are determined by some aggregate process, where firms do not have significant discretion over wage setting. The focus is on how firms establish, maintain, and end employment relationships, and on how firms provide incentives to employees, including models and empirical work on incentive systems, and as constrained by economic efficiency and risk incentive trade offs relating to personal compensation. Now, the discrimination and inequality. We know inequality and discrimination in the workplace can have many effects on workers. In the context of labor economics, inequality is usually referring to the unequal distribution of earning between households. Inequality is commonly measured by economists using the Gini coefficient. This coefficient does not have a concrete meaning but is more used as a way to compare inequality across the regions. The higher the Gini coefficient is calculated to be, the larger inequality exists in a region. Over time, inequality has on average been increasing. This is due to numerous factors including labor supply and demand shifts as well as the institutional changes in the labor market. On the shifts in labor supply and demand, factors include demand for skilled workers going up more than the supply of skilled workers and relative to unskilled worker, as well as technological changes that increase productivity. All of these things cause wages to go up for skilled labor, while unskilled worker wages stay the same or decline. As for the institutional changes, a decrease in union power and a declining real minimum wage, which both reduce unskilled workers' wages, and tax cuts for the wealthy, all increase the inequality gap between the groups of earners. As for the discrimination, it is the difference in pay that can be attributed to the demographic differences between the people, such as gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, etc. Even though these factors do not affect the productivity of the worker. Many regions and countries have enacted governmental policies to combat discrimination, including discrimination in the workplace. Discrimination can be modeled and measured in numerous ways. Wakasaka decomposition is a common method used to calculate the amount of discrimination that exists when wages differ between groups of people. This decomposition aims to calculate the difference in wages that occurs because of the differences in skills versus the returns to those skills. A way of modeling discrimination in the workplace when dealing with wages are Gary Becker's test models. Using test models, employer discrimination can be thought of as the employer not hiring the minority worker because of their perceived cost of hiring. That worker is higher than that of the cost of hiring a non-minority worker, which causes less hiring of the minority. Another test model is for employee discrimination, which does not cause a decline in the hiring of minorities, but instead causes a more segregated workforce because the prejudiced worker feels that they should be paid more to work next to the worker they are prejudiced against, or that they are not paid an equal amount as the worker they are prejudiced against. One more test model involves customer discrimination, whereby the employers themselves are not prejudiced but believe that their customers might be. So, therefore, the employer is less likely to hire the minority worker if they are going to interact with customers that are prejudiced. There are many other test models other than these that Gary Becker has made to explain discrimination that causes differences in hiring in wages in the labor market. Now we will have a look at criticisms of this labor economics and its theories. Many sociologists, political economists and heterodox economists claims that labor economics tends to lose sight of the complexity of individual employment decisions. These decisions, particularly on the supply side, are often loaded with considerable emotional baggage, and a purely numerical analysis can miss important dimensions of the process, such as social benefits of a high income or wage rate regardless of marginal utility from increased consumption or specific economic goals. From the perspective of mainstream economics, neoclassical models are not meant to serve as a full description of the psychological and the subjective factors that go into a given individual's employment relations, but as a useful approximation of human behavior in the aggregate, which can be fleshed out further by the use of concepts such as information asymmetry, transaction costs, and contract theory. Also missing from most labor market analysis is the role of unpaid labor, such as unpaid internships, where workers with little or no experiences are allowed to work a job without pay so that they can gain experience in a particular profession. Even though this type of labor is unpaid, it can nevertheless play an important part in society if not abused by employers. The most dramatic example is child raising. However, over the past 25 years, an increasing literature, usually designated as an economics of the family, has sought to study within household decision making, including joint labor, supply, fertility, child raising, as well as other areas of what is generally referred to as home production. What is wage slavery? The labor market as institutionalized under today's market economic systems has been criticized, especially by both mainstream socialists and anarcho-syndicalists, who utilize the term wage slavery as a pejorative for wage labor. Socialists draw parallels between the trade of labor as a commodity and slavery. Cicero is also known to have suggested such parallels. According to Noam Chomsky, analysis of psychological implications of wage slavery goes back to the Enlightenment era. In his 1791 book on the limits of state action, classical liberal thinker Wilhelm von Humboldt explained how whatever does not spring from a man's free choice or is only the result of instruction and guidance does not enter into his very nature. He does not perfume it with truly human energies, but merely with mechanical exactness, and so the laborer works under external control. We may admire what he does, but we despise what he is. Both the Milgram and Stanford experiments have been found useful in psychological study of wage-based workplace relations. The American philosopher John Dewey posited that until industrial feudalism is replaced by industrial democracy, politics will be the shadowcast on society by big business. Thomas Ferguson has postulated in his investment theory of the party competition that undemocratic nature of economic institutions under capitalism causes elections to become occasions on blocks of investors, coalitions, and to compete to the control of the state. As per anthropologist David Graeber, the early wage labor contracts we know about were in fact contracts for rental of chattel slabs. Usually, the owner would receive a share of the money and the slave another, with which to maintain his or her living expenses. Such arrangements, according to Graeber, were quite common in New World slavery as well, whether in United States, Brazil, or any developing or underdeveloped country. C.L.R. James argued that most of the techniques of human organization employed on factory workers due to the Industrial Revolution were first developed on slave plantations. Additionally, Marxists posed that labor as commodity, which is how they regard wage labor, provides an absolutely fundamental point of attack against capitalism. It can be persuasively argued, noted one concerned philosopher, that the conception of the worker's labor as a commodity confirms Marx's stigmatization of wage system of private capitalism as wage slavery, that is, as an instrument of the capitalists for reducing the worker's conditions to that of a slave, if not below it. That's for today, friends. I know that these videos are getting lengthy little bit, but it contains full information on the topic, which I think would be useful for anyone who deals with economics subject. Rest in the next. Bye bye, and please subscribe, like and comments in my channel.